Okay, so what I'd like to do here is get into some neuroanatomy as we learn the specific areas in the brain that produce dopamine and what parts of the brain they innervate, or at least those they have they send axons throughout the brain, but those that we're concerned with in terms of the reward center is what we're going to focus on here. So let's start with whole brain gross anatomy, and this will be a good review. So here we're taking a look at the left side, and this is the cerebrum, and specifically the part of the cerebrum we can see from the outside here is the cortex, all the wrinkly bit, right? But the cerebrum includes parts of the brain that we can't see, that just not on the outside, but the inside here as well. So this is the cerebrum, and so we've got, right, our four major lobes here. We have our, and you can try to test yourself here. I can pause it every time. Which one is this? This is what we would call the parietal lobe. And then we have this one in front, frontal lobe. The one in the back, primarily concerned with processing visual stimuli, is occipital. And this one here on the side. Let me make sure I leave room for the rest of the brain here. This is the temporal lobe. Okay, and then coming down, we're not going to be able to see everything, but we have a little bulgy bit here. Coming down, I guess I'll do a little bit of coloring here. This is our pons. And we have the medulla. Medulla. Yeah, medulla has two L's. And then, of course, we have our spinal cord, the rest of our central nervous system. Extending downward, and let's not forget the mini brain back here. That's our cerebellum. Okay, great. Somewhat of a crude drawing there, but will fit our purposes. So let's take away the cerebrum here. Not just the cortex, but the whole cerebrum here, because there's a few structures here that we can't see. And I'll try to draw things a little bit bigger here. So we have, and leaving room for labels, we'll have our pons again, our medulla. Our medulla, our pons. And then we have a structure up here. And this is our midbrain. Excellent. Sitting on top of our midbrain, we have this oval-shaped structure, and this is our thalamus. Now, this is important as we get superior to our midbrain. The medulla, the spinal cord, the pons, and our midbrain, these are all like one structure. But when we get into the cortex, we see that it's bilateral. So there's two of each structure. So in fact, there are two thalami, right? And so this would be, taking a look here, right? This is our anterior, and and this was our posterior. Oops. I'm really testing the limits here. Right, so, essentially our front and our back. So this would make this the left, the person's left thalamus. But there are two thalami. And I'm going to have to erase our front here to make room for what is underneath the thalamus. Well, we have this structure that's called the hypothalamus right here. And we've got a few different things here, actually. A structure here that isn't technically part of the hypothalamus. This is the optic chiasm. This is where the optic nerves cross. And then also the pituitary gland. Of which there are two, right? We have an anterior, should be this one up front, and posterior pituitary glands. Okay, excellent. So we're getting closer to the nuclei of interest for understanding the dopaminergic reward pathway. But we're going to have to take a different look here because it's embedded within our midbrain. So what I'm going to do here, what we would be viewing here is a sagittal section of our brain. And so I'm going to take a transverse section, and we're going to take a look at it down here. So this is our transverse section. That's a nice looking S, isn't it? Of the midbrain. And specifically, this would be the superior end. Superior end of the midbrain, right? So it's the top portion here. Okay, so this is a somewhat curious looking section here. Oh, that does not look good. And I'm going to attempt to draw it relatively symmetrical because that's what it is. Okay, that's a little bit better. And so what are the salient portions in here? Well, we can orient ourselves and remember again, this is our back, right, or posterior. And this is our anterior end, or front. Well, when you take a look at this section, you notice a little hole right here. Right, and that hole is the cerebral aqueduct. All right, so this is what's carrying cerebral spinal fluid from the third ventricle, which is superior, down the long cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle, which is behind. Right, so I'll draw here on our sagittal section, down here to our fourth ventricle, which is in between the brainstem and the cerebellum. Right, so this is the fourth ventricle, and I'll we have lots of lines here now, so I'll color code it blue. All right, so this is our cerebral aqueduct. Okay, we also have these interesting structures here. and these are called the red nuclei. Nuclei. And these are involved in, interestingly enough, they're involved in gait, walking gait. So the distance of your gait, swinging of your arms. It's involved in the movement of legs and arms in infants and babies, babies that can crawl. And this is a little cute anecdote, is that the transverse sections of the membrane, superior membrane, look remarkably like Mickey Mouse. So you might be able to see that. Two more structures that you might remember seeing on our neuroanatomy here. The two little bulges back here, and I'll draw them up here as well. And these are the superior colliculi. Superior colliculi. Yeah. And the superior colliculi are involved in vision, not perception, but the oh no, I'm getting too close to the end now. In the eye motor movements. So moving your eyes around. And interestingly enough, individuals that have compromised superior colliculi or lesions to them in rodent models are highly distractible. So it's thought that these parts of the membrane are involved in distractibility as well. An important feature in attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Okay, so now I know this is taking a bit here, isn't it? So let's get straight to the important part here. I'm going to ruin our Mickey Mouse. And we have what's typically you see referred to as just simply the VTA. And this is of paramount importance for the reward system. This stands for the ventral tegmental area. VTA. And then one more area before we go that'll be important to at least mention. Two nuclei right here. And these are what's known as the substantia nigra. Okay, and the substantia nigra are, so the VTA is involved in the reward pathway, and the substantia nigra is involved in, are dopaminergic as well, so I should make that clear, right? The VTA is dopaminergic, and so is the substantia nigra. While the substantia nigra is not directly involved in the reward pathway, there is communication between the two. And as we'll see, it's important because the reward pathway gives us, is responsible for goal-directed behavior in movement associated with motivation. And so it's important that our reward pathway is hooked up to the pathway that's involved for mediating movement, because if we want to move towards a reward or a perceived reward, we need to communicate with the substantia nigra. Okay, so let's move on to the next section now. Take yet a little bit more look at neuroanatomy and take a look at how the VTA pathway communicates with the rest of the brain. Okay, now let's talk about our specific dopaminergic pathways. There are two that are important to know in terms of the mammalian reward system. the mesocortical pathway and the mesolimbic pathway. So the meso version, or the meso prefix means or stands for the mesoencephalon. And if you remember that from our neuroanatomy lecture, this is a fancy word for the membrane. And of course, cortical stands for cortex. So this is the dopaminergic pathway that goes from the midbrain to the cortex. And our limbic, mesolimbic pathway. And so we've talked about the limbic area, which is composed of a number of different places that we find in the cortex and subcortical structures. But this one refers to a very specific one that we'll become very familiar with as we go along. It's called the nucleus accumbens. Nucleus accumbens. Okay, so we're going to learn where this is shortly. But first, we're going to return to the meso part of our two different pathways. So up here in the upper right-hand corner, let's label our VTA again right here. But I'm not going to put everything else in here. But this is our VTA right here. And so again, this is our transverse section of this superior portion of the midbrain. And right on top of this, I'm going to attempt to draw our two thalami that sit on top, superior to our midbrain. So these two oval areas, right? And so we can really see that there are two now, and they're supposed to be symmetrical from front to back, anterior to superior. So I'll do my best there. There we go. And I'll sort of maybe color them like this so that they get this illusion of transparency, so that it's clear that these structures are on top of the midbrain. And so this space that we have in the middle here, right? This is our third ventricle. Ventricle. And you can remember our aqueduct here, or cerebrum aqueduct, that drains cerebral spinal fluid from the third ventricle down into the aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. Right, so this is all filled with cerebral spinal fluid. And so what is in front of our midbrain section here and just below the thalami? Well, it is the hypothalamus. But the hypothalamus, which you can see actually over here, labeled here in the brain that I just put a star in, is a little bit misleading. It looks like it's one structure, but it's actually hollow inside. And it's filled with cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, so what's important about this structure? Why am I starting with this? Well, we need to talk about some very important projections that come out of the VTA. And in fact, I'm going to recolor our VTA here red, and I'll try to keep this consistent throughout our drawings. And so there are two major nerve tracts that come out of the VTA and into the hypothalamus. Now, one important thing about the hypothalamus is that it's one structure, even though it has a clear left and right side. it's always termed the hypothalamus, or the left hypothalamus, or the right hypothalamus. There's no such thing as hypothalami, because there's just one of them. Unlike the thalamus, which there are two thalami in each brain. Okay, so these projections from the VTA are important for both the mesocortical and mesolimbic pathways. This is what we call the medial forebrain bundle. Shortened to MFB, the medial forebrain bundle. So the VTA, dopaminergic neurons, it's through the MFB through which dopamine can be sent to other areas in the brain. And so let's take a look here at this other brain section that I have drawn here. This is what we would call, can you tell me what kind of section this is? Brain section. It is slicing right down the middle symmetrically. We would call this a mid-sagittal section. Okay. So let's take a look at, we have I'm going to use red again, in our midbrain. Our right, this would be the right half of our VTA, sitting up here at the anterior, near the anterior end of our midbrain, as we have sectioned. And our medial forebrain bundle projects out into the hypothalamus. And what it does is, I'm going to draw it a little bit thicker here, is it projects out into the cortex and goes throughout the brain. And it has, right, and these bundles are many, many, many neurons. Okay, this isn't just one neuron. Neuron projections come off of this medial forebrain bundle into the rest of the brain here. All right, and remember this right here that I have labeled, this is the mesocortical pathway. But there's only one area of significance for our purposes in understanding the reward pathway here. And it's a small area in the frontal lobe, relatively small area, right here about. Everything within this green portion here. And this is what's known as the medial prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex, which is often referred to as little MPFC for medial prefrontal cortex. And so what does that mean? Well, it's the most anterior end of the frontal lobe, and it's the medial portion, so it's the inside, the midline portion of it. So we're gonna take a look from a top down, or you can think of this as a transverse cut very, very crudely here of the brain, and the two hemispheres here, and I'll use green. And so, well, first I'll just say that, right, our prefrontal cortex is right here, approximately. And so the medial is the one that's adjacent to the midline. And so this is our medial prefrontal cortex right next to the longitudinal fissure that separates our two hemispheres. So that's our prefrontal cortex. So that's the medial part, a very specific part of our prefrontal cortex. Okay, great. So let's now consider the mesocortical pathway. And I think I'm going to have to move this over to another sheet to make room. Okay, so let's continue a conversation about the neuroanatomy of the dopaminergic pathways. We went over how the VTA sends dopamine to the cortex in the mesocortical pathway. And so now we're concerned with the, there we go, the mesolimbic. A little too thick there. The mesolimbic pathway. Okay, so first, we're going to add some structures to this picture right here of our superior midbrain, our thalami, our VTA extending medial forebrain bundles through the hypothalamus. And we're going to add some structures here that are lateral, right? So this is an anatomic directional term. It's lateral to the midbrain and the thalami. And so that's going to be further away from the midline. Lateral means away from the midline. Right? And so we have a structure here that's sort of shaped like this. And this is called the lenticular nucleus. And it's called that because it's sort of reasonably looks like a lens. And there are two different parts of the lenticular nucleus here. And I'll color code. We'll try to keep the colors different here. And so this first part out here, we have the putamen. I've heard it pronounced putamen as well, but I, for whatever reason, prefer putamen. And we also have, I guess we'll need something else. Let's do purple for this part here, which is called the globus pallidus. You might remember these from neuroanatomy. This is part of our part of our basal ganglia. And now to draw some of the other structures, I'm going to go back to a excuse me, I almost had a sneeze. We're going to go back to a mid-sagittal view. So over here on the left, let's see, I'm going to draw my midbrain here, and pons and medulla, right down here in spinal cord. And then, as always, we have our thalamus that sits on top. And so we have a few other structures here that I want to highlight that are sitting lateral to our thalamus. And so we have right here, this is our lenticular nucleus, and specifically the part that you can see is the, well, I don't need to do that again, do I? I can just draw a line to the putamen right here. How convenient. Okay. And let's do orange for this next section. And so we have a large structure here that's anterior to our lenticular nucleus, and it snakes around the thalamus. And remember, this is all lateral. Oops, I'm creating some sort of weird Escher-like structure that doesn't exist. Here we go. And this right here is known as the caudate nucleus. Caudate nucleus. And we have one more structure that's missing here. And let's see what color are we already have purple, so we'll go with pink, I guess. Right here, very important one, are nucleus accumbens. Okay, now all these three structures right here, the nucleus accumbens, the caudate nucleus, and our putamen, they all are collectively referred to as something that you'll see a lot, the striatum. Right, the striatum does not include the globus pallidus. So that's the structure, and this is much of our basal ganglia here. The striatum and the globus pallidus are all part of the basal ganglia. And so, if I might attempt to draw these structures in the transverse section part here. And so first this will be sort of tricky because sort of the superior to inferior dimensionality of this, but we have sort of in front of the putamen, we have our curvy caudate nucleus. I guess it might kind of like, I don't know if that sort of gives you a three-dimensionality to it that curves on superior to and then underneath. And where are we? Pink for our nucleus accumbens. Right here. Right, that is our nucleus accumbens, usually shortened to NaC. And then let's complete our pathway from the medial forebrain bundle. This splits in the hypothalamus, and this goes to and innervates the nucleus accumbens. And so this is our mesolimbic pathway from the VTA to the nucleus accumbens. I know there was a lot of extra stuff here, and I could have just said that right off the beginning, but I think it's helpful to sort of realize where these areas are in the brain. And plus, this is a good review that, in part, of some of the neuroanatomy that we learned previously. Okay, so now that we've gone through and you've humored me going through the neuroanatomy of the mesolimbic and the mesocortical pathway, both pathways that are going to be essential for understanding the reward system in our brain. And so we're going to jump right into that in the next, I'll make that the next video. So I'll see you soon.